Hey there, it's a quick overview of the yeast starter calculator tool in Brewer's Tool Belt. First off, big thank you to Kai Troster, the Braukaiser, for his awesome work on calculating yeast growth, and all the data and equations from his work are what's running behind this calculator. On the Hommel Homebrew Brewer's Tool Belt webpage, you'll see a link to the article that has his whole write-up if you're interested in looking at the everything that made up the calculations here. So a few things to pick here. So the idea is you're a couple days before brewing, and you're going to go ahead and build a starter to grow up the amount of yeast that you want to pitch, as well as have a nice, healthy, happy, recently fed pitch of yeast. So first off, you pick your pitch rate. And when you click on it, it'll bring up a wheel down here at the bottom. You can pick your pitch rate, and I have some little notes here on the types of beer that you would typically use this pitch rate for. So let's say we're brewing a lager, and 1.5 million cell per degree Plato pitch rate. You can see here you can toggle between liters, gallons, Plato, and SG. So this is the volume of wort you're going to be pitching this yeast into. So let's say I'm doing 6 gallons of wort in my fermenter, and that this is a 1050 beer. You can just put in your viability percentage here if you want to just do that by hand. I have added in a calculator here. So I'll just say that based on calendar date. So let's say it's just a month old. So it's going to calculate to 78% viability. Or as I mentioned, you can just go in here and put in whatever you want here by hand. And then you pick the way you're doing the starter. So is this dry yeast? Are you using liquid yeast? And if you are you doing no starter? So you're just going to be going out and purchasing a certain number of vials and just throwing them in. Are you doing a non-agitated starter? So you put the liquid yeast into an Erlenmeyer flask, but no stir plate. It's just sitting there. Stir plate, or are you repitching from a slurry? So I think probably pretty common is liquid stir plate. Now I need to do, if I'm doing liquid, if I'm doing dry or slurry, I don't have these settings, but if I'm doing liquid, I have to do my liquid yeast settings. So I'll go in and say how many starter vessels. So this would be, you could have multiple here if I'm going to do like a 2-liter starter and then pitch that into a 5-liter starter and do a multi-stage to grow it up. So I'll just go ahead and do 2. So if I click on that, it'll let me pick my number of vessels here. So I'll just say 2. And let's say I'm starting with a 2-liter vessel, and then I'll be pitching that into a 5-liter vessel after that. And then I'll go ahead and hit submit. So this is telling me that I need, for the settings I put in, I want to pitch about 425 billion cells. So in order to do that, I do a 2-liter starter to begin with, and pitch in the full 2 liters with 200 grams of DME. I would then take that and pitch it into 1 liter with 104 grams of DME. I might look at that and say, well, I'd rather start with a smaller starter and then go bigger. So I just go back and change this setting and maybe start and say I want to keep the first one to a liter and then recalculate. So in this case, I do a 1-liter starter and then be pitching it into a 2-liter starter with 200 grams. And that way I can just start with 1 vial of yeast, pitch it into a 1-liter starter, and go on from there. I might say, well, I only have a single vessel. for example, and let's say that's a 2-liter vessel. And now I resubmit. I still obviously need the same amount of yeast, but the calculator will figure out, well, I can't do that with a single vial, so I'm going to need 2 vials of yeast and then pitch that into the full 2-liter starter, and that will get me to the required amount of yeast. As I mentioned, you can also go in and do dry yeast or a slurry. I'll just give you an example of dry yeast here. It'll just show me how many grams of dry yeast do I need in order to get to my cell count there. Or also, if I'm pitching a slurry, it'll calculate the amount of slurry to repitch, and this is for an average density slurry. So if you have a particularly thin or very dense slurry, this amount's not going to be accurate. So this is going to be a pretty a moderate density slurry that would be typical for harvesting and repitching. So I hope you found this video to be helpful, and I hope you enjoy using Brewer's Tool Belt.